Alright guys, so the next step of your flower project is making the stem. The stem is a little bit more involved than making the petals. There's a few more steps, but nonetheless it's still a pretty easy part to make for your entire project. So you're going to need to acquire yourself a piece of 3/16 round bar made out of mild steel. We're going to be cutting this down to length and making it into a stem, putting some threads on it, as well as putting some bevels or chamfers on the ends as well, so stay tuned for that. So the first thing you'll need to do after you acquire that, you'll need a tape measure as well as a Sharpie. And we're going to be measuring out a total of 5 inches. Or I'm sorry, we're going to be measuring a total of 6 inches. Measure out 6 inches, mark it with a Sharpie, and you just need one small little mark right on the end, just like that. After that, we're going to be putting it inside of a vise. I would encourage that you use these vices on the ends of my tables that have wood in them, so that way it can protect the metal from getting like bent up, or maybe even like chips, or even dented as well. Don't use these metal vices because one, some of them don't have teeth inside them, and the ones that do have teeth will dent up your metal. Put it inside the vise. Make sure that you have about 1 inch sticking out from the end of the vise. You don't want too much or else this whole thing will bend on you. Clamp it down inside the vise. Make sure it's nice and tight. Not too tight though, you don't want to damage the wood. We're going to be using a hacksaw. Now hacksaws, they're different than wood saws because the teeth are meant for cutting metal. If you look very closely, teeth are very tiny. Whenever you're cutting through metal, the teeth have to be tiny of a saw. That way it takes away small little pieces at a time. If you try to use a wood saw for cutting metal, I'm not saying it would not work, but it's just not meant for that, and the blade just won't perform its proper work. So the first thing you would do, take your thumb, place it right next to that line. Your thumb is going to act like a guide. It's not going to get cut, so just keep that in mind. Take the blade, pull it back a few times to get a groove started. And after you have a groove started, just slowly start going back and forth a few times until you have a nice groove started all together and you can safely take your hand away. At this point, take your hand, grab onto the part that's sticking out or else it'll start to wobble around. And you want to go back and forth and cut the whole way through. Don't push too hard or else this thing will be hard to cut and you'll bend the metal. Push too light and nothing will happen. You need just a nice firm action. Make sure you're using the entire blade and not cutting like that. And cut the whole way through. One thing to keep in mind, do not pull up on this or else it'll start to bind and pinch the blade. If anything, push down just a little bit. One thing to keep in mind, be careful at the end because they have a sharp little burr, and because you're going back and forth with two metal surfaces, you're creating friction. This will start to get rather warm and hot, so don't be alarmed if you accidentally touch it, and it's a little on the hot side, so keep that in mind. All right, next step. We're gonna need to head over to the belt sander, dress up these corners. There's some burrs here, and before we put threads on it, because we're gonna have to put a total of 2 nuts on here for fasteners to hold and pinch everything together, we have to go through and actually put a bevel or a chamfer, which is basically a 45-degree angle on this piece of metal. That way we can easily thread. Without a bevel, you could thread, but it's not gonna be as easy to get your threads started. So stay tuned for that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, these are my belt sanders that I have right here. I have one on the left, one on the right. These are meant for metal only. That's why most of them are marked. If you would use wood on these, it wouldn't exactly break them, but for the most part, it would probably clog up the belt and it wouldn't work as nice anymore. So what we want to do, just like I said a little bit earlier, so we want to take this edge, put a bevel in it, or a chamfer, as some people like to call it, and we don't want a square edge or a sharp point. So when you're doing this, when you come over to the belt sander, a couple things you have to be careful of. Keep your fingers away from the belt. It's not going to hurt you too bad if you accidentally go up against it, but you don't want to touch it. Also, keep your fingers away from this gap. The third thing I would say, whenever you're sanding, keep your piece of metal flat on the table. You never want to hold it up here because you might accidentally rip the belt, or it might take the piece of metal and slam it onto the table. Also, don't hold it up here at an angle or else it'll take the piece of metal. And it's happened before where someone was trying to sand and this actually got shot down through, past the table, and got stuck underneath where the one lower wheel is. So all you'll need to do, hold it flat on the table, put 2 fingers down like this, and it's kind of like a game of pool. Your one hand on the right, its job will basically be turning this, holding it at a 45-degree angle, and turning at the same time. Press lightly, and this machine will do all the work. Don't push too hard, like I said, or else you might accidentally cut this, and we'll have to put a new belt on altogether. Now keep in mind, every now and then it might be a good idea to just back away, take a break, because when you're sanding, especially metal, it starts to heat up. Metal is conductive, and you'll have a very hot piece of metal, and your hands will maybe get burned if you're not careful. After you're done sanding, it's going to be a good idea to take the piece of metal, dip it inside of this water just to cool it down, swirl it around a little bit, kind of like you're stirring like coffee or like hot chocolate, and then inspect it, see how you did, and you should be pretty much good. You want to bevel both sides, the top and the bottom, or vice versa, however you want to look at this, okay? Now, one thing I forgot to mention is the shape that we're looking for. If you look closely here, we're looking for a kind of like a cone shape without the point. We're not making like a dangerous dagger or anything. We're making something that kind of looks like a cone. These 2 beveled edges, or the bevel edge goes the whole way around on both sides without the point. So that's, in the end, that's exactly what you're looking for. Both sides should be pretty much identical. If you don't have enough of a bevel, it's going to be very difficult trying to put some threads on this. If you have too much of a bevel, then you're just wasting material altogether. Alright guys, so the next thing we're going to be focusing on is putting threads on our piece of metal. So a few things we're going to need. We're going to need a soft jaws for the vise, and I would prefer that you use the metal vices, use soft jaws to help protect your metal. That way metal does not get damaged to a certain extent. We're also going to need a tape measure as well. Let me grab that from over here. A marker. We're going to need some of these correct sized, I believe they're like 6/32 fasteners. We're also going to need a block of wood, as well as a hammer and a die to make threads. So the first thing you want to do is we have to think about, okay, how much threads do we need? How many threads do we need on our piece of metal? What I would suggest is you want to put about 3/4 of an inch of threads on your metal. 1/2 inch is not enough. 1 inch is just overboard. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure out and make a line right at 3/4 of an inch. Like so, with a Sharpie mark. It's probably a good idea to transfer that line the whole way around, just as a little bit easier to see. Just like that. After that, we're going to securely take the piece of metal, put it inside of the vise, like so, clamp it down so it's not going to go anywhere. Don't be afraid to really clamp down on it because it should not move. We do not want this thing to move at all. Next thing, this tool right here, it's called a die. They come in different sizes. If you look on the inside, they kind of look like they have grooves on them. If you've ever wondered how they put like threads on an object or something, whether it may be like interior or exterior threads, they use a tap and a die set. So this is a die, and these are the correct size threads that we want so we can fasten these nuts on. So what you'll do to do this correctly, let me move this up just a tad. I don't want it to be too low. Green side should be facing up. The side with these like little adjustment screws should be facing down. These 2 handles, keep them nice and straight and level and even back and forth. You don't want to tilt it too far front or back to the side. Push down just a little bit. Apply some pressure. Turn, move your hands just very carefully, and keep turning. You want to get a total of about maybe, I'd say, 2 to 2.5 turns in completely. Oh, it looks like that's starting to spin. It's not tight enough. There we go. Keep an eye on it so it doesn't spin. 2 total turns before you start going half a turn and backing off a quarter. So right there, it looks like we got our 2 marks, so we're gonna go half a turn, back off a quarter to break off. There's small little pieces of metal that are shaved off. Half a turn, back off a quarter. And you just repeat that process. Once you get started, it's pretty easy just to keep moving along. Now just keep an eye out where that Sharpie mark is. It might be hard to see, so every now and then you might have to take it off. The whole entire die set. So just keep threading it down. And you want to thread it until you get to the very top of that line. So let's just take a look here. It looks like we're just shy of it, so I'm going to keep on going just a little bit more. Half a turn, back off a quarter. Half a turn, back off a quarter. Okay, at this point it looks like we should have enough threads. We're going to back this off slowly, like so. Be careful not to damage the threads, that's really important. Back it off. Once you get to the top, just carefully remove it, just like that. Inspect your threads. Looks like I have just a little bit to go, but for now I'll just say that looks fair enough for me. The test to see if you did this correctly, you should be able to take one of these fasteners, a nut, that should be able to thread right on top, just like this. The first time you do this, it might be a little sticky, but once you wind it up and down, it should be fine for the most part. And for each of your projects, you'll need a total of 2 of these fasteners to make the whole entire thing work. So this one's getting a little stubborn, but there we go. All right, next step. Keep those on there to help protect the threads, by the way. Next step, we're gonna loosen this up. And honestly, this kind of looks boring as is. So what we wanna do is we wanna try and clean it up, give it some bends. So to clean up your project, grab a piece of steel wool. Right now it has this like dull, like ugly finish to it. What happens is when it comes from the factory, they dip it in a solution or they just have it coated with like an anti-rust coating. That way they're not selling rusty pieces of metal. All you'll do is you'll take a piece of steel wool, rub it back and forth, and this should take it to, I wouldn't say a mere finish, but it'll look a heck of a lot better than it originally did before. So just go back and forth and try to polish it up. And it's a lot easier if you do it now rather than doing it later. And the more time you spend on it, the nicer it will get. It turned out pretty good. All right, next thing, we have to put some, or make some bends for this project. So in order to do that, we're gonna flip this upside down. We're gonna keep these threads protected with these 2 fasteners. We want a total of 2 bends to make this look realistic. Put it inside the vise. Remember, we're still using the soft jaws. And we're gonna be bending in that direction. So here's where the block of wood and hammer come into play. Block of wood will protect the metal, that way we don't damage it by accident. Take the hammer and just smack on the side of it. And we want to bend it about just shy of a 45-degree angle. You don't want to bend it the whole way. And notice when I'm doing this, I'm hitting it away from me, like in line with the vise. If you hit it off to the side, the whole thing will just like start to fall over and twist on you. So there's one nice bend. We're going to take it. I'm going to move this down a little bit further. And then I want to also change like the direction of what the bend is facing. That way it looks a little bit more realistic. We want to bend it the same way. That just wouldn't make sense. Tighten it down. Here's the second time. Take it out. Let's do a visual inspection of what it looks like. And that looks pretty darn good if you ask me. Nice and shiny. We don't have any like really dents or rough spots anywhere. We have some nice threads on there as well, and this thing's pretty much ready for assembly, so stay tuned for that. Alright guys, so the last bit of your project is nothing but a bunch of handiwork with a pair of pliers and using a ratchet set as well. So the first thing you'll do is you'll take your 1 fastener, thread it on the whole way, tighten it by hand, make it snug, and then you're going to take one of these ratchets, and it looks like it's a 7/16 drive, or 7/16 socket, I'm sorry. Tighten it down, make sure it's nice and tight, it's not going to go anywhere. And then here's where our petals come back into play. We're gonna dump those out, get those all ready to go. So we're gonna organize these in one special way. We're gonna set that guy separate. I want you to organize these from largest to smallest. Looks like there's two. This one is large, that one's smallest. Just like that. Now we're gonna take this one that kind of looks like Patrick's star, set it on first, and we're gonna go just in order from largest to smallest. Just like that. And make sure you try to like alternate your flower petals. It's really boring if you have them all facing in the same direction. It looks really weird, honestly. After they're all stacked on top, take your last fastener here, thread it right on. You might have to push this stuff down to kind of compress it so it's a little bit easier to work with. Be careful you don't cut yourself too. Tighten it down by hand. Take the ratchet, finish it off, make it nice and snug. That way it's not going to go anywhere. Now at this point it's just a bunch of handiwork with a pair of needle nose pliers. We're going to take the needle nose pliers. First we're going to bend up one petal at a time. The first layer is different from the following layers. The first layer you peel up one flower petal at a time. We're going to take our pliers. We're basically going to curl over one small corner or end at a time so it flares over just like this. You want to do both sides. Be careful you don't grab too much of a flower petal and bend it over and make it look nasty. So we want to basically make it look just like this right here. You do that to every single piece, and after you get done with the first one, bend it over, and the first layer is mainly there just to try and hide the end of the stem and the fastener that's sticking out. We're going to go back through, do the rest of them, repeat the whole entire process, fold and bend over the sides, and then fold it into the center. And at first it really won't make any sense until we get to the next few layers, that it'll start actually transforming into a flower. But like I said, it's just a bunch of handiwork with a pair of pliers. All right, we just have 2 more petals to go. Then we'll move on to the next layer. Oops, stuff's a little tricky. It's kind of springy too, since it's a lighter gauge aluminum. It has to spring back every now and then. Push it in. Try to push it and form it to a tight little pod. Pull up the next one. Curl in on one side and the other. And then we have our first part all together and done. You might have to just push a little bit and push until you get this like all grouped together. All right, now these next layers, and this goes for the following, I guess it would be 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. They're going to be basically similar but a little bit different. These layers, you're going to fold them into kind of like a U shape or like a C shape. We're not folding them the whole way over like we did the first initial row. And you just continue on and you do that for the rest of your flower petals. It's a good idea to try to keep this grouping as tight as possible, like that U shape. And every now and then just like try to squeeze them together. Keep it a tight little grouping. Make that nice little C shape. And you just repeat this whole process. Push it together until you get to the very end. All right, once you get it together in a nice little grouping, I wouldn't say it's complete yet. We can still add like just a touch of flair to make it look a little bit better. So instead of holding our pliers like this, which I find is a little bit easier, some people might find it a little bit easier to work with it like this. We're gonna take our pliers and turn them the other way, and we're gonna grab onto just these small little corners here and start to flare them out. So grab on the corners, and we're gonna do them on both sides. And this is what really sets off the flower or the rose itself. Makes it look a lot more realistic, like it's kind of like blooming and opening up, which is really cool. And you go through, and I would suggest that you do this for the first 2 or 3 layers on the very outside, and it will turn your project into literally a work of art, and it will look really great. And when I'm grading your project, I'm looking for all these like little pieces of detail. They're what matter to me the most, more than anything else. So if you spend a great deal of time, like an effort, making this thing look good, then your grade will reflect that as well. So just continue on and flare out all these like little ends. And you can see it like just by looking, it's really starting to take shape and look a lot better than it did, rather than just a hunk of metal attached to a rod of steel rod. All right, the very last thing you would do is you take like these little pieces here. Not exactly sure the technical name, what they're called. I usually like to take them and just bend them down a little bit like so. And then there you have it. We have this nice, like beautiful metal rose. Now you can go back through, do some tweaking here and there, but for the most part, if you give me something like that, I'm gonna be more than happy and satisfied with how your project turned out. So there you have it, one metal rose.